in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Last night was the third Republican debate. I think it really was a make or break debate for a number of candidates. We have 14, and I suspect now some will drop off. There's some that only have viability in 6 candidates, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. An opportunity to once again hear from the candidates, but an opportunity to see on display media bias in a way that you probably could not ignore, even if you really aren't into the political environment. And we'll talk more about that. That, of course, became the sub-theme fairly quickly. And you'll have a chance to, this afternoon, or as ever you might be listening to hear what was said last night. And so that's a great opportunity to give you a chance to hear those comments, and we have posted much of the videos on our website, pointofview.net, so if you'd like to watch them again, because sometimes it's helpful to see the body language or the reactions from others, we've posted those on the website, so you can follow those as well. Lots to talk about. Matter of fact, I'm not sure to an hour, but we'll do our best, and I know that some of you said, yeah, I can't watch it because I'm in church tonight. Some of you said, like to watch it, but the World Series, Kansas City Royals look unstoppable now, but we'll see how that plays out. Some others had some commitments, as I did last night, so we was able to collect these a little bit later. There's another story that we've been following, which we will cover a lot more on Friday, and that has to do with the coach, Joe Kennedy, up there in Washington, and Bremerton High School in Washington, has been placed on administrative leave by the superintendent. Of course, our good friends at Liberty Institute have been following that, and we'll see what unfolds there. We will talk more about that tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know that that has happened since we spent some time with Kelly Shackelford. Wondered what the reaction from Bremerton High School would be. That is the reaction. We'll see what we can do to give you some more information about that later. Perhaps tomorrow is probably the best time to do that in our weekend edition. We've got quite a roundtable of individuals that will join us then, and we'll talk about this. Well, I think you'd be one of those where if there was a make or break debate, I think this one's it. Recognize there is another debate in November, there is another debate in December, but as we start getting into sort of the holiday season, people don't pay as much attention, and so as you get closer to Thanksgiving, you get closer to Christmas, people aren't going to be paying attention as much, and frankly, there are some candidates that are hoping to get some kind of breakout. Otherwise, they'll just simply run out of money and they'll have to step down. And I think we are down to candidates. I'll explain who I think those are in just a few minutes. But you also saw on display, I think, a fairly good evidence of media bias. Some even said what looked like political assassination. These are not the kind of questions you would ask, I think, Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, but these were the questions being asked and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Chris Christie and John Kasich and Donald Trump, and, go down the list, you know who they are. And so we are going to maybe start with those, because the first series of questions were kind of interesting. Everybody had a chance to talk about what their weaknesses were, and so let's hear what some of the responses were from Ted Cruz, Chris Christie, and Rand Paul.
Biggest weakness is exactly the opposite. I'm a fighter. I am passionate about what I believe. I've been passionate my whole life about the Constitution. And, for 6.5 years, we've had a gigantic party. If you want to grab a beer with, I may not be that guy. But if you want someone to drive you home, I will get the job done, and I will get you home.
Governor Christie?
Yeah. I don't see a lot of weakness on the stage, quite frankly. Where I see the weakness in those 3 people that are left on the Democratic stage. I see a socialist, an isolationist, and a pessimist. And for the sake of me, I can't figure out which one is which. But I will tell you this, the socialist says they're going to pay for everything and give you everything for free, except they don't tell you they're going to raise their taxes to 90% to do it. The isolationist is the one who to follow a foreign policy that has fewer democracies today than when Barack Obama came into office around the world. But I know who the pessimist is. It's Hillary Clinton. And you put me on that stage against her next September, she won't get within 10 miles of the White House. Take it to the bank.
Senator Paul.
You know, I left my medical practice and ran for office because I was concerned about an $18 trillion debt. We borrow $1 million a minute. Now on the floor of the Congress, the Washington establishment from both parties puts forward a bill that will explode the deficit. It allows President Obama to borrow unlimited amounts of money. I will stand firm. I will spend every ounce of energy to stop it. I will begin tomorrow to filibuster it. And I ask everyone in America to call Congress tomorrow and say, enough's enough, no more debt.
Again, there were 10 individuals that answered that question. I wanted you to hear from a couple of them that I thought were kind of interesting. And now, just even before we take our first break, let's get into this because, again, the question came to Donald Trump of whether or not he had a comic book campaign.
Book version of a presidential campaign?
It's not a comic book, and it's not a very nicely asked question the way you say that. Larry Kudlow, as an example, who I have a lot of respect for, loves my tax plan. We're reducing taxes to 15%. We're bringing corporate taxes down, bringing money back in, corporate inversions. We have $2.5 trillion outside of the United States, which we want to bring in. As far as the wall is concerned, we're going to build a wall. We're going to create a border. We're going to let people in, but they're going to come in legally. And it's something that can be done, and I get questioned about that. They built the Great Wall of China. That's 13. We actually need 1,000 because we have natural barriers. So we need 1,000. We can do a wall. We're going to have a big, fat, beautiful door right in the middle of the wall. We're going to have people come in, but they're coming in legally. And Mexico's going to pay for the wall because Mexico, I love the Mexican people. I respect the Mexican leaders, but the leaders are much sharper, smarter, and more cunning than our leaders. And just to finish, people say, oh, how are you going to get Mexico to pay? A politician, other than the people on this stage, I don't want to insult, a politician cannot get them to pay. I can. We lose. We have a trade imbalance with
Mr.
Mexico.
Trump, hold on a second.
John. $50 billion.
We're at 60 seconds. We're at 60
Believe me,
seconds.
the wall is peanuts by comparison.
We're at 60.
Again, you get ability, but remember that comment about a comic book campaign because it comes up a little bit later. We're going to hear from Ted Cruz, and of course, he started the criticism of the media, and it's sort of interesting that when Donald Trump raised the issue of immigration a couple of months ago, everybody started talking about it. Once Ted Cruz criticized the media, and you'll get a chance to hear that quote that is really making its way around Facebook and the internet and all of that, then all sorts of other people have said that this was not a good night for the media, or especially CNBC, but it certainly was a good night for some candidates and maybe the end of some candidacies for others. So you're going to have a chance as we come back from the break to hear from some of those individuals. But I'd also love to hear from some of you that had a chance to watch the debate. Perhaps you have some observations and some comments, because this one was to address some of these. When we come back, we're going to hear a little bit from Ben Carson on the issue of his flat tax. Ted Cruz today in the Wall Street Journal has a simple flat tax for economic growth. You also have an economic plan from, of course, Donald Trump. And just the other day, Carly Fiorina had one which talked about Hillary Clinton flunks economics. So some of these economic issues are very important. Oftentimes, candidates win or lose on the economy. So we'll come back and hear some of their comments, as well as some of the point and counterpoint. The gloves were off a few times, and you'll have a chance to hear that right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, numerous surveys suggest that the millennial generation is quite willing to reject the Bible and Christian faith. In the past, the Bible was seen as a roadmap for life. Now, if it is considered at all, it is often seen as merely a book of suggestions. Ready to Return documents the secular trend and provides recommendations on how to reverse this trend. The book is the third in a trilogy. The first book, Already Gone, showed how many young people have already checked out of Christianity, while still, the second book, Already Compromised, documented how many Christian schools have compromised on the Christian faith, and this book focuses on those young people who have views at odds with biblical truth. They found that 30% of church-attending millennials believe that there are other books, such as the Quran, that are inspired by God. 2/3 believe that they will go to heaven if they are a good person, and a believe that the Bible contains errors. When Ken Ham was on my radio program, we also discussed how incorrect views about the Bible and salvation also translated into false views about various social issues. For example, half of all millennials would never marriage. Nearly a third believe that abortion should remain legal in most instances. It should be obvious from these percentages that parents and churches have not done enough to train Christian young people for the secular world. Half of the church-attending millennials who were surveyed to defend their faith in Sunday school. We need to equip these young people, and they need to know what the Bible teaches, and they need to know how to defend what the Bible teaches in a secular world that is either hostile or indifferent to biblical truth. Ken Ham's new book is a reminder that we need to equip the next generation so that they know what they believe and why they believe. And that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. We had the third Republican debate last night, and the focus primarily was supposed to be on economics. As you will see, though, it went much wider ranging than that, but certainly economics is very important. And many of the candidates have proposed a flat tax. I mentioned already the proposal by Donald Trump, which basically said that if you have file a joint tax return and you pay no taxes at all. Fascinating. And others have put together one, the one that came out today by Ted Cruz, a simple flat tax for economic growth, and that is a 10% income tax and a 16% bill, that he believes, as he said, that would put an end to 8 lean years of President Obama. That above a certain level, individuals will pay a 10% flat tax on all individual income from wages and investment, no death tax, alternative minimum tax, or Obamacare taxes, elimination of the payroll tax, universal savings account. Well, someone else that has come out with that is Ben Carson. And Dr. Carson has talked about this being a flat tax and has used the illustration that, in the Old Testament, you had the tithe, which is 10%. Well, where one of the questions was about whether or not he wanted a 10% tax, whether or not this could really add up. And the implication, of course, is that he's not very bright. He doesn't know how to add numbers. His tax plan doesn't work. So let's hear what Ben Carson had to say.
Well, first of all, I didn't say that the rate, I used the tithing analogy.
I understand that, but if you look at the numbers, you probably have to get to 28%.
The rate is going to be much closer to 15%.
15% still leaves you with a $1.1 trillion hole.
You also have to get rid of all the deductions and all the loopholes. You also have to do some strategic cutting in several places. Remember, we have 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. Anybody who tells me we need every penny in every one of those is in a fantasy world. So also, we can stimulate the economy. That's going to be the real growth engine, stimulating the economy, because it's tethered down right now with so many regulations.
You'd have to cut government by about 40% to make it work with a $1.1 trillion hole.
It's not true.
It is true. I looked at the numbers.
When we put all facts down, you'll be able to see that it's not true. It works out very well.
Dr. Carson, thank you.
Listen, I want Governor Kasich, hold it. I'm coming to you right now.
Well, I want to comment on this.
Well, I'm asking you about this.
This is the fantasy that I talked about in the beginning.
About some of the fantasy. And so you had the counterpoint, not only between those who are asking the question and those were trying to answer the question, but also coming also from some of the people on the stage. And there gets to be a point where I think sometimes people, when they see this or they listen to it, they just say, you know, I'm just going to the Mets and the Royals game looks like, because you just get tired of the fighting that takes place and was really intense to try to create controversy on the stage. And so then at the end, you've had the Democrats say, well, we got along pretty well, and the Republicans are fighting. Of course, they're fighting for very important ideas, and I'm glad that they are. Well, one of those that you knew was going to be paying attention is for the last week, you've had everything from the Florida Sun-Sentinel to, of course, even some of the comments being made by Jeb Bush about Marco Rubio, that he was skipping votes. He was not there enough to vote on very important pieces of legislation in the United States. Important as that is, there have been some candidates, Bob Dole being an example, that dropped out so for the presidency, but he was probably going to drop out anyway. But you have many other candidates, and you're going to hear this from Marco Rubio, that actually both served in the Senate, missed a number of votes while they ran for the presidency. A deal about it, but this has now been the attempt to attack Marco Rubio. So here we go, and Marco Rubio was responding to not only some of the comments from the questions, but also from some of the candidates about whether or not he's pushing too fast and missing votes.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's exactly what the Republican establishment. Why don't you wait in line? Wait for what? This country's running out of time. We can't afford to have another 4 years like the last 8 years. Watching this broadcast tonight are millions of people that are living paycheck to paycheck. They're working as hard as they ever have. Everything costs more, and they haven't had a raise in decades. You have small businesses in America that are struggling. For the first time in 35 years, we have more businesses closing than starting. We have a world that's out of control and has grown dangerous, and a president that is weakening our military and making our foreign policy unstable and unreliable in the eyes of our allies, and our adversaries continue to grow stronger. They say there's no bipartisanship in Washington. We have a $19 trillion bipartisan debt, and it continues to grow as we borrow money from countries that do not like us to pay for government we cannot afford. The time to act is now. The time to turn the page is now. If we don't act now, we are going to be the first generation in American history that leaves our children worse off than ourselves.
So when the Sun-Sentinel says Rubio should resign, not rip us off, when they say Floridians sent you to Washington to do a job, when they say you act like you hate your job, do you?
Yeah, let me say, I read that editorial today with a great amusement. It's actually evidence of the bias that exists in the American media today.
But do you hate your job?
Let me answer your question on the Sun-Sentinel editorial today. Back in 2004, one of my predecessors to the Senate by the name of Bob Graham, a Democrat, ran for president, missing over 30% of his votes. I don't recall them calling for his resignation.
Is that the standard?
Later that year, in 2004, John Kerry ran for president, missing close to 60 to 70% of his votes. I don't recall the Sun. In fact, the Sun-Sentinel endorsed him. In 2008, Barack Obama missed 60 or 70% of his votes, and the same newspaper endorsed him again. So this is another example of the double standard that exists in this country between the mainstream media and the conservative media.
Senator, thank you. John?
Can I bring something up here? Because I'm a constituent of the senator, and I helped him, and I expected that he would do constituent service, which means that he shows up to work. He got endorsed by the Sun-Sentinel because he was the talented guy in the field. He's a gifted politician. But Marco, when you signed up for this was a 6-year term, and you should be showing up to work. I mean, literally, the Senate, what is it, like a French work week? You get like 3 days where you have to show up? You can campaign or just take the job. There are a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck in Florida as well. They're looking for a senator that will fight for them each and every day.
So again, this gives you just a little bit of the counterpoint, the back and forth and all that. I thought his response was very good. I mean, if we are going to say that if you're going to run for the presidency, you have to resign from your office in the United States Senate, that would have affected Lloyd Benson when he ran for vice president. It certainly has affected some of the names he just mentioned, whether it's John Kerry or Barack Obama, just think about all of that. Yes, we have one example, Bob Dole, but, I think we recognize that if an individual is going to run for the presidency, if anything, we oftentimes laud them for their dedication to going out on the campaign trail and meeting those individuals. So, it is obviously a hit piece. Something that was used by Jeb Bush didn't work, I think. If nothing else, people just saw him as critical of his former protege, and certainly it was one of the kind of highlights, if you will. But before we take a break, really the people that did the worst, I think, are not ones asking the question. And Ted Cruz started this, and this is a quote that has made its way around the internet today, in which he finally just had enough when he was asked a question that was on the debt limit, but he used it to come back at those individuals asking the questions about the way in which they're asking.
You know, let me say something at the outset. The questions that have been asked so far in this debate illustrate why the American people don't trust the media. This is not a cage match. And you look at the questions. Donald Trump, are you a comic book villain? Ben Carson, can you do math? John Kasich, will you insult two people over here? Marco Rubio, why don't you resign? Jeb Bush, why have your numbers fallen? How about the substantive issues people care about?
Does this count? Do we get credit for this one?
And Carl, I'm not finished yet. The contrast with where every fawning question from the media was, which of you is more handsome and wise?
Again, you had to laugh at that. We are going to take a break. When we come back, I'd love to get some of your comments. We've given you a chance to hear just a few of the highlights. We have some more to certainly bring to the table, but I'd love to get your comments. What about the way in which the media has been covering these campaigns? What about the questions? What about the tone? What about some of the taking the gloves off and the back and forth? And in many ways, are we seeing the beginning of maybe an insurgence and maybe a rise in a few other candidates like a Ted Cruz and certainly a Marco Rubio? Time, are we seeing the end of many other candidates? We'll talk about that, but I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls, but also hear from people like Chris Christie, Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz about issues like talk about the issue of cutting taxes and many other issues that certainly were raised in the third Republican debate. But if you'd like to join us, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after this.
Why does Kerby Anderson do? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the third Republican debate last night. And Jonathan Last said first of all, he said that the three winners of the night were pretty obvious. Marco Rubio, we just heard from, Ted Cruz, which we also heard from, and Donald Trump, which we heard a little bit from and we'll hear from a little bit more later. Talked about the fact that Marco Rubio probably ended Jeb Bush's campaign, which is thinking very interesting. He says was tough and canny, and actually certainly appreciated his full Gingrich assault on the NBC's ridiculous moderators, and also said he did a better job explaining Social Security reform than Chris Christie, and that's no mean feat, because, of course, Chris Christie does a good job, and you're going to hear those in just a minute. And, of course, you had Donald Trump. To that, you also could add some others, in addition to Chris Christie, Carly Fiorina and Ben Carson. Talks about some of the comments that they made and the fact that, they were fine, not outstanding last night. But that ends up with your final six being Trump, Carson, Rubio, Cruz, and maybe Fiorina and Christie. So one of my questions for you is, are you okay with one of those six, or maybe all of those six? 1-800-351-1212. I think you're going to begin to notice that even though we have 10 on the stage and 4 before, technically 14, I know that by the next debate on November 10th, we will not have 14. And it is quite possible we may have more than the 6 that are just mentioned here by Jonathan Last, but only because some of them, like Jeb Bush, may have the money to keep going, but some of the others will simply drop out. What are your thoughts about the choices that Jonathan Last talks about, which I would agree with, by the way, that really in some respects it's down pretty easily to 4. That is Donald Trump and Ben Carson and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. You could add into it Carly Fiorina and Chris Christie, but that begins to be pretty obvious. Either you take the 4 or the 6 out of the 14. And if that helps simplify some of your choices, I'd love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. So let's go first to Chris Christie. I love the way he sometimes will not even look at the moderators. He'll just look right at the camera. You can see the video a little bit later, and basically said, America, you've been lied to.
Well, I wish you would go when they broke it. I mean, let me be honest with the people who are watching at home. The government has lied to you, and they told you that your Social Security money is in a trust fund. All that's in that trust fund is a pile of IOUs for money they've spent on something else a long time ago. And they've stolen from you because now they know they cannot pay these benefits because Social Security is going to be insolvent in 7 to 8 years. Where's these other things? 71% of federal spending today is on entitlements and debt service, and that's with 0% interest rates. Now, I'm the only person who has put out a detailed plan on how to deal with entitlements, and it'll save $1 trillion over the next 10 years between me and Hillary Clinton. What Hillary Clinton's going to say, and has said before, is she wants to raise Social Security taxes. Now, let me ask everybody, and this is for, the guy who owns a landscaping business out there. If somebody's already stolen money from you, you going to give them more? Or are you going to deal with the problem by saying, I'm going to give people who have done well in this country less benefits on the back end? We need to get realistic about this. Forget about anything else. They've already been lied to and stolen from, and I'm going to go to Washington to stop it.
So again, Chris Christie, many people think he does a very good job of not only explaining what the problem is, but having a solution. But, as I just read from a minute ago, Jonathan Last thought that Ted Cruz did an even better job, and that led to kind of a point-counterpoint between Mike Huckabee.
This deal in Washington is an example of why Washington is broken. Republican leadership joined with every single Democrat to add $80 trillion to our debt, to do nothing to fix the problems. And let me note on Social Security, because we were getting into a good say I think both Chris and Mike are right. Governor Huckabee's exactly right. We need to honor the promises made to our seniors. But for younger workers, look, I'm 44 years old. It is hard to find someone, my generation, that thinks Social Security will be there for us. We can save and preserve security by making no changes for seniors, but for younger workers, gradually increasing the retirement age, changing the rate of growth so that it matches inflation, and critically allowing younger workers to keep a portion of our tax payments in a personal account, control, and we can pass on to our kids.
30 seconds,
we can do
Governor
both.
Huckabee.
John, let's keep in mind that for 1/3 of the 60 million on Social Security, it represents 90% of their income. And when I hear people talking about means testing, let's just remember what that means. If we means test Social Security, it means that the government decides whether or not I deserve it. If a person lives in a 7-room house, does the government get to say you don't need 7 rooms? Folks, the government has no business stealing even more from the people who've paid this in. I just want to remind you, people paid their money. They expect to have it. And if this government doesn't pay it, then tell me what's different between the government and burning prison today for doing less than what the government has done to the people on Social Security and Medicare in this country.
Some of the comments on Social Security. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take some phone calls. We'll go to Georgia first. What would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, I would like to say that I really appreciate Carson and his faith. I wish that I could choose several. I wish that I could choose. I think Donald Trump is good for the economy, but overall, I think that we need a man of faith in office. What I call Democrats that have taken the country in the wrong direction, and I think we need to right this ship. And I think that a man of faith, strong faith, can do that.
You know, again, recognize that either Donald Trump or Ben Carson become president, I will guarantee you that some of the other people on that stage will have some positions. You know, if Donald Trump is the president, maybe Ben Carson is a Surgeon General or Secretary of Health and Human Services. Carly Fiorina could be the Secretary of Commerce. I mean, you go down this list and recognize that some of these individuals most likely would have that. And so that is a good point. But since you brought up Ben Carson, let me go to what I felt was an unfair question, but I thought Ben Carson did a pretty good. Dr. Ben Carson was on the board of an organization that was supportive of so-called gay rights, but of course at the same time that marriage should be between one man and one woman. And they were trying to pin him as to whether or not he was being hypocritical about that particular stand on his board service on Costco, but on his belief that marriage should be traditional. Let's hear his comment.
Well, obviously you don't understand my views on homosexuality. I believe that our Constitution protects everybody, regardless of their sexual orientation. I also believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that there is no reason that you can't be perfectly fair to the gay community. They shouldn't automatically assume that because you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. This is one of the myths that the left perpetrates on our society. And this is how they frighten people and get people to shut up. You know, that's what the PC culture is all about, and it's destroying this nation. And the fact of the matter is, we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. It's those people who are trying to divide us who are the enemies, and we need to make that very clear to everybody.
But that was and a good illustration of maybe how to respond to that sometimes when people ask you a similar kind of question. Let's go back to the phones. And in Texas, KCTA, Ronald, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I've been listening, and I'm thankful for Ted Cruz and Mike Huckabee, people that stick by what and they stand for what's right. But Ted Cruz has my vote.
Well, again, I'm sure you probably voted for him as senator, and I suspect on Super Tuesday, you got to probably believe that Ted Cruz will do extremely well in Texas. We'll have to see how well he does in some of those states that lead up to it, which, again, in order would be the caucus in Iowa, and then also a caucus in Nevada, as well as primaries both in New Hampshire and South Carolina. But it'll be interesting to see. But I would agree with most people's assessment that he's in the top 4. And, or if you want to use 6, I think really we're down to top 4, and he is one of those individuals. So I appreciate your call. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll hear a little bit more on a few of these issues. Matter of fact, might as well play a piece that Ted Cruz had to say about the issue of women and wages, and also had some things about the Federal Reserve. Donald Trump also was addressing this issue of visas, so we'll get a chance to hear from him. We've already heard a little bit from Mike Huckabee, but he also has said that he was able to fight the Clinton machine and live to tell about it, which was sort of a throwaway line, but everybody went, ooh, in the audience. So I don't know if that was intentional. Might have been, knowing him. So we'll see how this plays out. But again, if you'd like to join the conversation, we certainly welcome you at the table. 1-800-351-1212. Second hour today, we're going to get into some areas of Christian theology and apologetics again, because we only can stand so much of the political debate, but we still have a few more things to talk about in this hour, and we'll talk with you right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia this time. Shelby, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to the conversation?
One thing is, I wouldn't vote for any of these people. They contradict themselves. They are not for the people. They're not for us little people that need the help. And taxing us more, we don't need more taxing. We're taxed too much.
Yeah, and I think most of these people are talking about lowering your taxes, so I'm not sure that's a good argument.
No, they're talking about actually upping the Social Security on younger people.
No, well, let me see if I can try to explain that. What Ted Cruz is saying is if you're younger, you would be able to keep a proportion of that in an account rather than send it to the government and have them spend it, so that you would have something that actually looks like a retirement fund. And those who are on Social Security right now would continue to receive. I think there are some real questions about that. George W. Bush tried to do that after he was reelected in 2004.
We don't even have the money for saving like that. we barely can make ends meet on what we're getting paid, or for one income family.
So really the issue, I think, for maybe what you're talking about there is really the need for some kind of economic growth. But you raised a good question, and that was asked of Ted Cruz. What about, especially a single mom or women and wages? And that was a big issue in the campaign. So let me, if I can, just play. It's only going to take about a minute here of what Ted Cruz said, especially related to women and the issue of wages.
Well, we've got to turn the economy around for people who are struggling. The Democrats' answer to everything is more government control over wages and more empowering trial lawyers to file lawsuits. You look at working women. I'll tell you, in my family, there are a lot of single moms in my family. My sister was a single mom. Both my aunts were single moms. My mom, who's here today, was a single mom when my father left us when I was 3 years old. Now, thank God, my father was invited to a Bible study and became born again, and he came back to my mom and me, and we were raised together. But the struggle of single moms is extraordinary. And when you see Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and all the Democrats talking about wanting to address the plight of working women, not a one of them mentioned the fact that under Barack Obama, 3.7 million women have entered poverty. Not a one of them mentioned the fact that under Barack Obama and the big government economy, the median wage for women has dropped $733. The truth of the matter is, big government benefits the wealthy, it benefits the lobbyists, it benefits the giant corporations, and the people who are getting hammered are small businesses, it's single moms, it's Hispanics. That is who I'm fighting for, the people that Washington leaves behind.
Very good. So again, just gives you a little bit of an understanding of some of those issues. But let me take at least one more phone call here. Rosemary in California, I think you have a question, so I'd love to give you a chance to ask it on air.
Yeah, my name is Rosemary. I'm listening to your station, right? Can you hear me?
I certainly can.
Okay, what happens is that I'm on Social Security. I had 2 strokes. I had my first stroke at the age of 36. I couldn't go back to work. And what happens is that people that are not able to go to work, and it's hard for people that are incapable to go to work. What's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to people that are disabled, with cancer patients, with people that can't see, can't talk? What's going to happen to them? My mom died with cancer. I had her in a care home. She had bed sores as big as baseballs on her back because the nurses didn't turn her. I took my mom out of there, and I quit my job just to take care of her. And I'm wondering what's going to happen to patients that are, you're talking about people that are low income and don't have jobs and they can't. People would rather go to jail than go to this because they get more money in jail than they do here.
Yeah, and that, I think, illustrates exactly why this whole program that was instituted back in 1935 that sounded real good back then hasn't worked out so very well for a couple of reasons. Chris Christie, I think, did a very good job of explaining people are living longer, and so we have fewer people paying into the system. As a result, we have a problem with the fact that people are living longer and the ratios are off. And that's why we have to stop pretending that there aren't some very important changes that need to take place. And of course, every time you begin to talk about that, that's when everybody gets really nervous. But there is another reality on the horizon. And that reality is if we don't do something to figure out how to treat and help and to support people like you, while at the same time trying to make sure it is solvent, eventually it won't exist anymore because there just simply won't be enough money. That is, as we were talking about, and we heard Chris Christie talk about, if already 71% of the federal budget has to do with various entitlements, which would include, of course, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and things of that nature, many of which people paid into, as Mike Huckabee was talking about, we certainly have to honor the commitments to those individuals, but at the same time, we will just simply run out of money. And so at that point, you say, well, then what does happen? Well, either we just continue to pay it out, and the only way we can do it is we don't have enough money coming in, so then the Federal Reserve begins to print more money. So then we have runaway inflation, or else we begin to say, well, I'm going to have to cut your Social Security check in the future. And so what these individuals are talking about right now is trying to forestall and prevent that particular disaster from taking place. The illustration I like to give is if you ever are canoeing down the Niagara River, which I wouldn't recommend, there gets to be a point where eventually, if you see the Niagara Falls in the head of you, you are going over the falls. No matter how much you paddle to the side, you will not make it over. And so all of us are saying there is going to be a problem if we don't address this issue of Social Security sometime in the future, and hopefully very quickly in the near future. Otherwise, we'll just go over the Niagara Falls. And that's the real concern that a lot of people have. And so one of the issues that I think we are seeing being debated and was debated last night is this issue of Social Security. And while I know that kind of rattles our cages a little bit, at the same time, we've got to think not only about what we are doing for our children, but our grandchildren and the financial stability and solvency of Social Security. So that was one of the issues that certainly surfaced last night, and we certainly can talk about this in a future program because it deserves attention, but they spend a fair amount of time looking at all sorts of different issues, from the Federal Reserve to whether or not we have the right immigration policies, and certainly what could be a very significant way to stimulate economic growth. And that has been put forward by people like Ted Cruz and Ben Carson and Donald Trump and others, a flat tax. And so we'll see what some of the other candidates say. But I think we are down, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, down to probably 4 individuals that are really kind of the ones that are going to be heard from most often. And that'll be Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz. It's kind of interesting. Also, last night, MSNBC did an assessment of the words used in the first 3 debates. And they found that those who were communicating at the lowest level, the 5th grade level, were people like Donald Trump, John Kasich at about the 6th grade level, and then all the way at the top, at the 7th, almost 8th grade level, Marco Rubio, and the very top at the 9th grade level, Ted Cruz. So again, you can see that most of the candidates are communicating in a way that helps most people understand what is happening. You are not necessarily getting a college level or graduate level presentation, but still, for a lot of people, as we've heard from a few of our callers here, concerned about what is going to happen in the future with Social Security. That's why we need to pay attention to which candidate we elect now and what that's going to mean for our children and our grandchildren. Let's take a break. We're going to change topics when we come back. All that coming up right after this.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So often in this program, we talk about helping you develop a biblical worldview so that you know how to articulate a biblical worldview. But we also talk about the importance of apologetics, knowing how to defend a biblical worldview. And this new book will be helpful to answer some of the questions you might have, but even more helpful so that you will be prepared to answer questions that you run into as you talk to friends, neighbors, coworkers, maybe even family members about the Bible, about Jesus Christ, and about biblical ideas. It's entitled Short Answers to Big Questions about God, the Bible, and Christianity. The authors are Clinton Arnold and Jeff Arnold, and the foreword by J.I. Packer. Dr. Arnold is the dean of Talbot School of Theology in California. He is an individual that graduated from Biola University as well as from Talbot Theological Seminary, has his PhD from the University of Aberdeen, even has postdoctoral work that he has done at the University of Tübingen, and has been an author of so many other books. In particular, you might be familiar with the Zondervan Exegetical Commentary on the New Testament. He's also, of course, been the editor of the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds, has written about such things as 3 Crucial Questions about Spiritual Warfare, and much more. Has served in the past in the New Testament department, of course, is now the dean of Talbot School of Theology. And Dr. Arnold, great to have you on the program with us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It's an honor to be on your show.
We have 9 different categories in your book, and over the next hour, I'll try to pick a few from each one of those. But maybe before we get into some of the specifics about the Bible, can you help us get kind of a lay of the land, why you picked these particular topics and these categories? And are these ones that you find most often that seminary students and other people are really trying to answer?
Yeah, for quite a number of years, I was leading a team that was grounding new believers in the faith in a large local church here in the Southern California area. And these represent questions that people typically had, and they also represent areas that are really just foundational, essential to the Christian faith.
Well, and again, it seems to me that these are going to be ones that we're going to run into. Let's take a few in the Bible category, first of all, and that is we like to prepare young people for going off to college. But even if you don't go off to college and you're just simply watching television, maybe a guy like Bart Ehrman comes on and begins to tell you that, well, we have all these errors in the Bible. We got some contradictions in the Bible. As a matter of fact, maybe a little bit we'll talk about another aspect of whether or not we even have the right books in the Bible. And I've seen how this, Dr. Arnold, has so often challenged the faith of not only young people going off to college, but even Christians that are sitting in the pews wondering, do I have the right Bible in my hands? And what about some of these errors and contradictions? You have 2 different chapters in this book that address those issues. And how do we go about dealing with that in general? And then maybe we can look at a specific or 2.
Yeah, I think this is such a crucial question because I think you're absolutely right. Our students leave the church, they go off to college, and then just bombarded with a variety of different ideas about the Bible under the common assumption that it's riddled with errors, riddled with contradictions. It's like a snowball that runs down the hill and picks up all kinds of sticks and rocks and stones along the way, and it's very different from what it was in the day of the apostles to now. And there's just a vast array of questions that need to be answered, especially for our young people, to get them really grounded in the faith before they go off to college. And And there is quite an array of these kinds of questions.
Well, and I think part of it is some people wonder if we've got a problem with the telephone gain. I talked about that just the other day with one of my other guests. But, we've had Darrell Bach in the studio. We've had Daniel Walson in the studio. We have all sorts of individuals, but they get the sense, and again, for the telephone game, if you're not familiar with it, you whisper something to somebody in the front of the room, and then they whisper it to someone else. And by the time you get to the back of an auditorium or even a classroom, what's at the back has nothing to do with what was at the beginning. And there's a sense in which we maybe don't trust our oral tradition. There's a sense in which maybe there was when we have the first manuscript, but we know a lot more now than we did back, say, a century ago when people were being so critical about the so-called textual issues that are so often used in sometimes these universities or even in some of these television broadcasts to begin to challenge our faith.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm glad you've had my friend Dan Wallace on the show. He's got a Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. But one of the things that's really exciting right now is that we continue to find new manuscripts of our New Testament and even of the Old Testament. And what it enables us to do is to look and see out of a manuscript that was recently discovered, how would it compare with the form of the Greek text that Bible translators are using today, for instance, in the translation of the NIV or the ESV or one of the other modern language versions? And when we compare a recently discovered manuscript with the Greek text that we have today, well, we find, wow, we've got it. There's no real essential difference. And I was excited a few years ago, there was a new manuscript that was discovered called Papyrus 90, they've labeled it. And it's a 2nd century fragment of the Gospel of John. And I undertook a very detailed analysis of it to see where it compared, where it differed from the Greek text that we have today. And what was interesting is what I discovered was there were some spelling differences. The name Pilate was spelled P-E-I-L-A-T instead of P-I-L-A-T, and there were some differences in grammar in the way things were expressed, but absolutely nothing that would even change how one would translate the text. There was a difference in emphasis. In one instance, they said, crucify, crucify, the crowds referring to Jesus. And in another instance, they said, crucify him. But these are so minor in terms of what it means to understand what that passage is saying.
And again, I just mentioned that some of the chapters in this book are things like, are there errors in the Bible? Has the Bible changed over time, which is what you're citing from right there? Are there contradictions in the Bible? One other one, and maybe since we're getting close to a first break here, we'll talk about it after the break, but were some books left out of the Bible? Again, young people that might to go to a college campus, they'll hear about the Gnostic Gospels, but even if you don't go off to campus, you probably have seen the Da Vinci Code, and even though that's a fictional book, it's sort of based upon this idea that some of these other Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene or the Gospel of Philip, actually show that Jesus was married, plus some of these Gospels, so-called Gospels, really should have been in the New Testament and weren't. So we'll come back and talk about what's called the canon of Scripture, and then we'll get into some of the tough questions. If indeed God is good, why is there evil in the world? Some questions about the supernatural, about life after death, and even whether or not there's evidence for the existence of God and how we can do that. Certainly you can learn a lot of that if you were to enroll at Talbot School of Theology. We've had Sean McDowell here talking about that and others, and certainly that would be one option. But if you cannot, certainly I would encourage you to get books like this, Short Answers to Big Questions About God, the Bible, and Christianity. And it is a book of 360 pages, and it's published by Baker Books. We have information about it on our website, and we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Clinton Arnold right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, numerous surveys suggest that the millennial generation is quite willing to reject the Bible and Christian faith. In the past, the Bible was seen as a roadmap for life. Now, if it is considered at all, it is often seen as merely a book of suggestions. Ken Ham's latest book, Ready to Return, documents the secular trend and provides recommendations on how to reverse this trend. The book is the third in a trilogy. The first book, Already Gone, showed how many young people have already checked out of Christianity while still in middle school. The second book, Already Compromised, documented how many Christian schools have compromised on the Christian faith, and this book focuses on those young people who have views at odds with biblical truth. They found that 30% of church-attending millennials believe that there are other books, such as the Quran, that are inspired by God. 2/3 believe that they will go to heaven if they are a good person, and 1/3 of them believe that the Bible contains errors. When Ken Ham was on my radio program, we also discussed how incorrect views about the Bible and salvation also translated into false views about various social issues. For example, half of all millennials would never speak out against same-sex marriage. Nearly 1/3 believe that abortion should remain legal in most instances. It should be obvious from these percentages that parents and churches have not done enough to train Christian young people for the secular world. Half of the church-attending millennials who were surveyed said that they were not taught to defend their faith in Sunday school. We need to equip these young people, and they need to know what the Bible teaches, and they need to know how to defend what the Bible teaches in a secular world that is either hostile or indifferent to biblical truth. Ken Ham's new book is a reminder that we need to equip the next generation so that they know what they believe and why they believe it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Clinton Arnold with us today, and he is again the Dean of Talbot School of Theology. If you'd like to know a little bit more about him, we have a link to talbot.edu on our website. We have information about this book, Short Answers to Big Questions About God, the Bible, and Christianity. It is published by Baker Books. Look for it in your local bookstore, but it may be a little more difficult to find, so that's why we've made it possible for you to order it online and to get a copy and to use it not only to educate yourself and to prepare you for interaction, but it's something I would certainly encourage you to pass on to those who maybe have important questions. These are some of the big questions. It gives short answers, but also then points them in other directions to find some of those answers. And Dr. Arnold, let's, if we can, maybe get back to this issue. The issue of the Gospels and the so-called Gnostic Gospels and the pseudepigrapha. There are, again, a lot of our listeners say, no, I believe what we have in the Bible is what God intended. But you go into a Religion 101 class in a secular university, and they'll begin to make you think that we have the wrong books in our New Testament. So how do we think about this?
Yeah, and any of your readers who have read the Da Vinci Code, you know, we're led to believe that, wow, there's a lot of lost gospels, a lot of lost scripture out there that should have been in, and it isn't. But one of the things we have to recognize is these so-called lost gospels were known to the early church. They were known to the church fathers, and they were part of a branch of literature that we know as Gnosticism. And a number of years ago, there was National Geographic Society made an announcement about this Gospel of Judas, the man who betrayed Jesus, and a gospel written in his name. And they aired this right before Easter Sunday one year. And in reality, the Gospel of Judas, which was recently discovered, was known by the early church fathers, and they spoke against it. It was part of this collection of Gnostic texts. It wasn't even written in Greek. It was written in Coptic, and it advocated a certain worldview that was counter to Orthodox Christianity, a Gnostic worldview. And in Gnosticism, there's a belief in two gods, not one, and that the world is created by an evil creator God that was an emanation from this unknown God, and so on. So it's a very different situation than just, wow, there's some material in there that should be included in the Bible that's not.
Yes, well, and sometimes when I speak, I'll talk about that Gospel of Judas, and always as a joke say, now does everybody understand that Judas did not write the Gospel of Judas? And of course I get a laugh, and I say, well, that helps you understand that some of these were written in the 2nd, 3rd century. They were not written by apostles. They were not written by eyewitnesses. They were not considered to be orthodox. They were rejected by the church, and on and on. And so that's sometimes very helpful. But again, those are the kind of answers you have in the book, because again, whether you're going off to the university or whether you're just turning on a PBS special or a Discovery special or something like that, you'll get a heavy dose of some of that can really challenge your faith. And we need to remind our listeners that there are good answers for all of those questions that have been raised, and individuals with credentials equal to or sometimes even superior to the people raising those questions have ably answered those questions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, one of the things I tell my students here at the seminary is if we're right and the Bible is the inerrant Word of God, we have nothing to fear in looking at history, because the deeper we go into history, we will find that our assumptions about the Bible are proven true. And as a historian myself, I've done a lot of research on the backgrounds of the New Testament. For me personally, the deeper I get into the historical context and the historical background of the Bible, the more that I find it illustrates the Bible, and I'm not finding things that contradict the Bible. And it becomes a way of strengthening my faith. It's really helped incredibly.
Let's see if we can maybe move on to another category on tough questions. And one of those is, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Now, you can do whole programs on this. There have been whole books written on the subject. But again, maybe you could give us, Dr. Arnold, just a little bit about how to think about that very difficult question, because it does come up. It's a question that Christians ask, and it's obviously a question that skeptics and non-Christians ask as well.
Oh, it's such a huge question, and when it hits us personally and close at home with a family member or something, we can't help but ask these sorts of questions. But I think one of the things that's been helpful to me is the recognition that this is something that Christians from the very beginning struggled with. If we read the book of Acts, we find a situation where we have James, one of the 12 apostles, killed by Herod. And why didn't the Lord intervene and save James in the same way that he saved Peter by releasing him from jail miraculously? The text of Acts doesn't tell us why, but we can have confidence, a God who has a grand plan, a grand way of unfolding things, and we can trust him. The other side of this, too, is that with the fall of Adam and Eve, sin entered into the world, and sin not only affected me personally, but it affected all of creation, so that part of living in the world in its unredeemed state is the fact that there will be bad things that happen to good people as a natural part of what it means to live in the world. So the question might even be better phrased, why doesn't God intervene in every single instance? And that's a really tough question to answer.
Sure, but it gets into some of the theological issues. They call them theodicies and things of that nature. But again, as we're talking about the book, short answers to big questions, 50 different questions. And at the end of each chapter, I might just mention, Dr. Arnold, that you have key passages and then a series of discussion questions. This one on why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? 7 good questions. So before we move on, let's just talk about how people could use this book. It would be certainly helpful for an individual to go through or to put on his or her shelf, and then when a question comes up to pull it back off. But I was also looking at the fact that with these discussion questions, you could have really a nice Bible study or Bible fellowship or Sunday school class in which you could take on one of these issues, read all the key passages, and then use the discussion questions for a discussion time to get deeper into God's Word.
Oh, it's exactly what we had in mind. We would love for that book to be used in that way because it covers so many of the essentials of the Christian faith, so many of the key issues. But we wanted to keep the focus on what the Bible says. You know, what has God revealed through the Scripture, so that the listing of key passages is really crucial. So a Bible study group could look at the text itself, text of the Scripture, and then work through these discussion questions. And we tried to word the discussion questions in ways that weren't just right or wrong answers, but would really lean into real life and cause us to try to grapple with how does the Scripture then pertain to these real life issues.
Dr. Clinton Arnold with me, and we're talking about the book, the short answers to big questions about the God, the Bible, and Christianity. One of the sections is on supernatural. Do angels and demons really exist? And it's interesting that I saw a survey recently done of the younger millennials, and a lot of them do not believe in Satan or do not believe in angels and demons. And they think, well, that's kind of superficial, that's superfluous, it really doesn't matter. I just believe in Jesus. But if you believe in Jesus, that's enough right there, because Jesus believed in angels and demons, didn't he?
He sure did, and you can go beyond Jesus from the very beginning in Genesis and all the way to the end in Revelation, from the opening page to the concluding page of the Bible. Angels and demons are part of the biblical worldview. The problem is we live in an era that has been so impacted by a materialistic, naturalistic worldview that we're not even sure God exists. And so we move a step away from that. Do angels and demons exist? People really struggle with that as well. I live really close to Disneyland, and so Mickey's out there with the Fantasia and Fantasmic, and I think people lump it all together, with angels and demons, and then the various fantasies that we have growing up as kids in the fictional realm.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into those questions. Is it possible to prove God exists? The various arguments, the cosmological argument or the fine-tune argument. We'll get into a couple of other issues, but if you'd like to join us along the way, you can do so, 1-800-351-1212. This may be a program you might want to just sit back and listen and take some notes, but if you'd like to join us, or if you've got a question that is one of those big questions about God, the Bible, and Christianity, we would certainly welcome those as well. Published by Baker Books and forward by J.I. Packer. We'll take some of those questions right after we have these important messages. We'll be back.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Clinton Arnold, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Short answers to big questions about God, the Bible, and Christianity. J.P. Moreland, who's been on the program with us, says this book is a rare treasure because it combines the scholar's mind and tough thinking with a pastor's heart, all written in an interesting and very accessible style. Jim Daly's also been on the program, president of Focus on the Family, said if you've ever wondered whether the Bible contains contradictions or how science and faith can work together, or whether Jesus truly represents the only way to heaven, this book is for you. It's filled with practical, easily digestible answers to some of the most pressing questions about the Christian faith. And Brian Loritz, who's also been on the program, seismic shifts in our culture over the past decade necessitate answers to questions we once took for granted. I'm so grateful for this theologically robust volume written in language readily understood by a broad audience. And so just a few of the comments about this book. As I mentioned before, over 360 pages. It's put in 9 categories, 50 different questions. And let's, if we can, Dr. Arnold, look at chapter 23. Is it possible to prove God exists? Part 1. So we'll look at part 1 and part 2. The first is the cosmological argument. That's one of those big phrases we use in seminary sometime to mean a cause and effect. How does that help us, especially if we're talking with our unsaved friends, to begin to argue for the existence of God?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that definitely comes up time and again, because it's easy for us to, those of us that believe the Bible will read Genesis 1:1 and say, in the beginning God created the heavens and earth. The Bible says it, I believe it, settles it. But it's difficult when you're talking to a scientist and trying to integrate current scientific understanding with what the Bible claims. But I think there's some advances in science that have pointed to the universe having a beginning. And that is something that can work in our favor in terms of helping us find a way to see if the biblical worldview is compatible with the current scientific worldview. So without affirming the Big Bang Theory, we can just say that the idea that the universe had a sudden, amazing beginning fits with the idea of God as being the creator of everything from the beginning. And so that's, in general terms, some of the direction that we're moving with that.
Well, and again, I think you could also learn a little bit about the cause of that, because you are talking about something that is larger than the universe, more powerful than the universe, that it is outside of space and time. Well, that kind of narrows it down pretty quickly, doesn't it? So
it narrows it. Yeah, it really does narrow it down. And I think what we find is we look at the modern scientific evidence that it fits hand in glove with a lot of what we've been saying all along, that there was an intelligent, supernatural, almighty, powerful creator who put this thing together and caused it to come into existence.
So the other part of it, and we had part 1, which is kind of the cosmological argument. The second is what you call the fine-tuning argument, and that is that as we look at the universe, it kind of reminds us of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Some have even referred to it as a Goldilocks universe because it is what? Just right. Talk about that if you might.
Yeah, it's when you look at the complexity of this universe and you think about all of the different elements that had to come together for it all to work in a marvelous harmony, it's statistically impossible for this to have just happened. It would be like winning the lottery multiple times, and defying every odd. And some might look at that and think, well, at least there's a chance, but really no chance of that. The way that the universe works together in all of its complexity, with all of the forces, the strength of gravity, expansion of the universe, the electromagnetic forces, all of the atomic particles and everything else, is truly a universe that has been designed to work in a marvelous and utterly complex way.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I'm going to move on in just a minute to another category of Jesus and the Spirit, but let's, if we can, take a phone call or two. So we'll head out to Texas first, KAVX. Francis, you're on with Dr. Clinton Arnold.
Hi there. How you doing?
What would you like to add to the conversation?
I just wanted to find out, by whose standards are we asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Is that coming from, just everyday American people or world people who don't know anything about Scripture? Or is that coming from people who know the answer to that question? And, if Messiah Yeshua himself didn't even consider himself good, then why is even the question coming up, why do bad things happen? Where are these good people that the bad things are happening to? I mean,
yeah, I disagree with the premise, because I think when Jesus said, "Why do you ask that I'm good?" Because I think he was asking the rich young ruler that. But that's a good question because the whole definition of good and bad presupposes, doesn't it not, Dr. Arnold, the idea that there is a standard of good and evil, and if you're an atheist and don't believe in God, then what's your standard for anything that's good or bad?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and I Francis, thank you for your question. I appreciate what you're saying here because before a perfect and holy and righteous God, who among us can even compare? And you're absolutely right on that. Who is good among us? But as Christians, we're clothed in the righteousness of Christ, and that's our only claim to good. We've been pardoned by the Messiah. We've been clothed with his righteousness. We can be called saints. So why do bad things happen to those of us who have entered this relationship with Christ? And anyone who experiences a death, an illness, a tragedy, asks that question, and we wonder why that is the case. And that's what we're trying to get to in the book. I mean, there's plenty of biblical evidence to show suffering will abound in the present evil age. But God has a plan in which he will redeem all of creation. He will redeem all of us ultimately. And in the interim, there are times that he does intervene spectacularly and miraculously. And that's where it gets tough, because we would want God to intervene all the time in our human selves. But we don't possess his wisdom. We don't know what his whole overall plan is in its details, and we have to defer to him.
Yes. Well, since we talked about Jesus, let's come to that chapter that was Jesus really God? And Jesus, of course, asked others, who do you say that I am? And I think, is he the Messiah? Was he an individual that was deluded? Do we have the accurate record of who Jesus was? How do we answer that very important and fundamental question about who Jesus was?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've been involved in the scholarly debates on this question, and there has been this movement in the larger world of biblical, historical, critical scholarship toward recognizing that there was, in the very beginning, an understanding among the early Christians that Jesus claimed to be God. And it was sudden and it was powerful, and it's pervasive in Scripture. And I think the Scripture is very clear in its claims that Jesus was God. And it's the liberal critics that have said previously that there's this evolutionary stage where Jesus went from man to toward the 2nd century. Then people started romanticizing him to be God. But we have Jesus resurrected, vindicated by his resurrection, and worshipped from the very earliest stages as God. And even the earliest testimony of non-Christians, there was a guy named Pliny in northern Asia Minor that observed the Christians worshiping, and he says they sing to Jesus as though he were God. Very early secular testimony to the fact that Christians believe Jesus to be God.
And that really sets aside what has been kind of the view that's oftentimes been espoused by liberals, and sometimes you see it in whether it's a Time or Newsweek or in some of the religion classes that are taught as well, that you had, the Jesus of history, and then eventually became the Christ of faith. But now we can see these earliest documents, both biblical and extra-biblical documents, show that that is not the case. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into one or two more. Again, there are 50 chapters in this book, 9 different categories. We won't cover all of those, but if you are just joining us, talking today with Dr. Clinton Arnold, and he is the Dean of Talbot School of Theology. His book is entitled Short Answers to Big Questions About God, the Bible, and Christianity. It is published by Baker Books, and if you'd like to know more about him, we have a link to talbot.edu. If you'd like to know more about the book or to order it, we've made it available there, a link that you can find to get it as well. So lots of questions to ask, and we'll do our best to answer a few more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we talk about short answers to big questions about God, the Bible, and Christianity. And in this secular, pluralistic culture, I'll guarantee you one of the quickest ways to start a fight is to quote from John 14:6. So, Dr. Arnold, let's talk about, is Jesus the only way to get to heaven? Chapter 36 in your book.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And I think as we look at what Jesus claims in that passage and then think of John's Gospel and when it was written to Ephesus in the very first century. And Ephesus bore an amazing similarity to our context today. It was a large urban center, religiously pluralistic. There's evidence of 50 other gods and goddesses worshipped there. I have often wondered, I wonder how people heard this living back then, but it was a bold claim to make in the early first century in this way. And the early Christian preaching was a proclamation of the one living and true God. And it was a continuation of monotheism, that there is one God who is over all and is the one to whom we will give account someday. So there has been this exclusivistic understanding in Christianity and then in Judaism through the Old Testament before then that we have to, is a hard truth, but it's something that we have to recognize.
Well, again, it is something that is part of that section on how to know God and questions about the Christian life. But just before we end, let's talk about some of the essential Christian practices. And I wanted to bring up one or two that actually surfaced in a previous discussion that we had. And one of those, do Christians have to go to church? We see that the younger you are, especially among the millennial generation, oftentimes we want to really reach out to this next generation. There's this idea that, well, church is sort of optional. If I go to church, fine, but if I don't, I can worship God in my own way. But if we go back to the purpose of the church and the various ordinances of the church, even though there is sort of this mindset today that says, well, it's not that essential that I go to church, the scriptures tell us something otherwise, don't they?
They sure do. Even the very imagery of what the church is precludes the idea that we can live without it. The church is a body of believers put together. So if you're a hand, you can't live without the arm, you can't live without the head and the rest of the body. So there is a scriptural image that this is absolutely essential. One of the other images of the church that I think the millennial generation would love to hear more about is the fact that it's a family. That when you become a Christian, you are becoming a member of a family with mothers and brothers and sisters and fathers and various family members. And we need the various members of the family to grow together for support, for encouragement, to coexist. And so living without the church is living without relationship, and relationship is at the heart of Christianity.
Yes. One other aspect of that is, do I need to be baptized to go into heaven? And you tell kind of a funny story about when you were to be baptized, you kind of slipped, so you didn't completely go under the water, and you always sort of wondered if maybe you hadn't been baptized enough to be saved. But what about this? Because, again, I think most of our listeners would say baptism is important, and we should be baptized, but it doesn't save. And so, again, you'd have some pragmatic people saying, well, if it isn't, then why should I be baptized? And you address that in the chapter.
Yeah, I do. And yeah, that story, I can still feel the emotion of it because I had an elderly pastor and I didn't get all the way under the water. I was immersed.
That's so good.
And I was really worried about that. And it took me a while to understand this better in conversation with him. But the image of baptism, we need to understand that it is an image, and it's a ritual that conveys a picture of what it means to, in accord with Romans chapter 6, to die with Christ, being submerged into the water, and then coming up into the newness of life that this ritual depicts. And so even the word baptizo, from which we get the word baptize, means to dip or submerge, a boat in the ocean that goes down into the water and sinks is literally baptized in Greek. And so it's a very important picture of the new life that we have in Jesus Christ.
Well, and if nothing else, this book is an attempt to try to answer some of those big questions, and we've covered just a few. I knew we were not going to get 50 in an hour, but just for a minute, let's, if we can, talk about, again, how people can use this, because, Dr. Arnold, it seems to me that there are 50 questions, and at each chapter you usually have passages, and in every chapter you do have, of course, discussion questions. So I think this would be just a great Bible study, something that even pastors could use, and so more than just a book that could be on your shelf and you could consult from time to time when you have a question, you could use this in a very effective way to almost kind of teach systematic theology and basic Christian living.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think if you got a group of people or a Bible study group that wants to be refreshed, even in the basics of what the Christian life is all about and some of the basic apologetic issues, this would be a good week-by-week study. The other thing that we're finding is people are giving this book away to friends, coworkers, and so on who are just checking out the Christian faith. Often there's these little hindrances. People have niggling questions about the Christian life that prevents them from going further in their quest to check out the Christian life. And so this may be a good thing to give to a person you know that is just wanting to figure some more things out.
So again, all of that is in the book, Short Answers to Big Questions About God, the Bible, and Christianity. We also have a link to talbot.edu. Now, there may be some of our listeners that would like to attend the seminary, but also there are opportunities through distance education. So talk about, just before we run out of time, what might be available to anybody that wants to know more about Talbot Seminary.
Yeah, we're just all of a sudden here increasing our array of classes that we are making available online for people who live at a distance and can't relocate to Southern California. And so, check us out at talbot.edu and press the online tab, and you can find an array of options for classes that you could take living anywhere you are around the world or in the United States.
And I might just mention, they do have extension campuses, for example, in New York City. So some of our listeners that listen to us in New York or Connecticut or Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Jersey, that would be another option there as well. So, Dr. Arnold, I appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's been a real privilege. Thank you so much, Kerby.
Again, a lot of this can be found in the book, Short Answers to Big Questions. And if you'd like to know more about him, you can go to our website, and that will give you some more information. If you would like to get a copy of the book, you can probably find it in some bookstores. But if you can't find it in the bookstore that you frequent, we've given you an opportunity to order it. And it is available through Baker Books. 50 different, very important questions with very good answers with suggested Bible verses and discussion questions. So I would certainly recommend it to those of you who are teachers and want to know a little bit more. Well, we spent some time today, obviously, talking about the presidential debate in the first hour, and about some areas related to theology and apologetics in the second hour. Tomorrow is our Friday weekend edition, and I hope you'll join us then, because we have some special guests in studio with us, and so the round table will be convened, and we'll get a chance to look at all sorts of very important topics that need to be addressed. So I hope you'll join us then. Until then, visit our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Matthew, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app, with quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.